Okay, so recording is now in progress. I am now also going to share my slides with you. What I intend to do is to do a very, very brief overview of the grant round, so to revisit what we were trying to look at and what we're trying to achieve with the grant round, and also where applications were the strongest and where applications may have struggled slightly as well, and what that looks like in practice, and give you some real life kind of examples. What I would like to say is like with every grant round, it's highly competitive. So often that means small margins in terms of those who we fund and those who we don't fund. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. I am going to try and make you all a bit bigger as well. Hopefully I can see here. So it is really small margins in which we kind of take projects through, and you'll see the numbers we're working with in terms of the number of applications we get and how we go through our assessment process as well. I'll make sure we stop and have enough time for questions, but ideally I think this will take us about 20 minutes to go through, and then I will open up for questions for everybody. So feel free to kind of chip in and for us to have a real discussion about things. I might not be able to ask if there are really specific or detailed questions about specific applications. We had over 130 applications, so it'd be quite challenging to pick up on individual applications, but I will try my best to answer as many of the questions as possible. The other thing that I would say is, you know, we're in the 4th year of us being a What Works centre, and although we've made massive strides in our commissioning process, we're still learning as well, and we're very much open to feedback, open to hearing from you all, and we understand there are things that we also need to improve as well. So I just wanted to be really clear about that. We don't think we've necessarily nailed it all. We do think there are things that we can kind of take on board and iterate our processes as well. So in terms of a trusted adult, what were we looking to achieve, or what are we looking to achieve, and what does that look like for this particular grant round? Probably worthwhile starting off by showing you, or if you haven't seen this, or if you have seen this, revisiting our strategy. And what our strategy looks like from the Youth Endowment Fund perspective is basically 3 core strands. So we want to fund good work. We want to find out whether it works, and then we want to use the information that we've gained from that to be able to work for change, to change policies, change systems, and really use evidence to inform those changes. The space of youth violence is really, really broad, and I know I'm probably talking to the converted on the call. So we made a conscious decision, I think probably about 2020 when we started to revisit our strategy, to really start to focus on and prioritise some of our focus areas. And we did that because we could run the risk, if we opened up to absolutely everything in the youth violence space, of actually finding nothing because we've spread ourselves too thin. So we worked really hard by doing a number of consultations with key stakeholders, with young people, to really start to refine what are the areas we should focus on and fund essentially. And you can see on the left-hand side, we have 8 focus areas. We have a couple of others that we can also focus on as well, which are currently TBC, and we've purposefully kept those TBC. And the reason for that is because sometimes the landscape changes. There are sometimes things that come up within flight that we think we should focus on this. But we know, based on the information we've got now, these are our 8 focus areas. And you've probably seen that the one at the bottom, number 8, positive activities, is our latest funding round to open. In terms of funding good work, what does that mean in practice? For us, that means finding promising projects that are able to help us answer our research questions that we have aligned to those specific themes. And even within those kind of focus areas and themes, we narrow down what it is we're specifically interested in based on what we know the evidence is able to tell us right now, and some of the key gaps that we want to fill. Underpinning all of what we do is our partnership. So we can't do what we need to do. We can't advocate for change based on evidence and good practice unless we can work with the sector or multiple sectors that work in our space to help us try and reduce youth violence. So it's really important that we're able to build partnerships and coalitions with partners who may be grantees, who may sit on some of our boards or movement hubs that we have. So we really are looking to build that kind of network to make sure that we can push forward with our mission. But why are we here today? So what is today going to be about? So it's not often that we're able to provide feedback on some of the things that we do. We do know that, and most of us in my team in particular, but also other teams across YEF, have worked for organisations who have applied for funding for different funders. So we've been the other side of the fence as well. And we do appreciate how useful it is to get feedback. Because of the volume of applications we get, it's not possible to give individual feedback because we just don't have capacity to do that. But we do value the time that applicants take to be able to apply to our funding rounds. So we commit to trying to put on these sessions so we can at least tell you some of the key themes or patterns that we've maybe picked up across applications within this particular funding round, and let you know areas that were strongest, areas that seem to do less well in applications, and what that means in practice. And that's exactly what we're going to be able to do today. Before we do that, I thought it was just useful to revisit a trusted adult. And I think the reason it's really important to do that is because a trusted adult is, or could have potentially been, a really, really broad area for us to focus on. So as part of our scoping for that grant round, we really had to narrow down, what do we want to find out with this grant round? How do we best do that? And therefore, what should we fund? So the key question, or the overarching research questions that we were answering for this grant round was essentially, do approaches that focus on building positive and trusted relationships with an adult outside of the family environment lead to improved outcomes for children and young people? We're primarily interested in those aged 10 to 18 with the greatest unmet needs that put them at high risk of being affected by violence, offending and or exploitation. So that set the scene really about what we're looking to answer as part of this grant round. We then needed to understand what our definition of a trusted adult was, because that again can be really broad, and we needed to be really clear about what it was and what it wasn't. So we specifically said for this funding round, it isn't a family member or friend, but it is someone who has the knowledge, skills and capabilities to build trusted relationships and deliver specific approaches that support positive outcomes for a young person. There are clear roles and responsibilities, and boundaries are established between a trusted adult and a young person. So that was our definition of a trusted adult. If we then move on to within that, who we want to support, and I apologise, some of these slides are flicking around. I will do my best to keep on top of it. But key to this grant round really was the young people we're here to support for this grant round. And we were really purposefully trying to narrow down the young people that we wanted to focus on with this funding. And for us, as we said, it's those obviously aged between 10 and 18, or when young people have found to have a problem that has become serious, or where we've wanted to prevent reoccurrence, or to help young people after a serious problem has occurred to prevent or reduce long-term harm. And then we gave specific bullet points around what that looks like in practice. So that's potentially young people who are affiliated with groups, often referred to as gangs, involved in crime, violence and trafficking, those affected by serious violence, criminal or sexual exploitation, that could be as perpetrators or victims, part of families with ingrained intergenerational continuity in harmful or challenging behaviour and those repetitive cycles of abuse, trauma and neglect, and where young people are in contact with services that target youth offending or affiliation with groups, are known to the police and multi-agency safeguarding teams and may have been in custody, and or are engaging with detached or outreach youth workers. The last bullet point was particularly important for us because through our research with this grant round, what we'd found is that detached and outreach youth work were particular areas where trusted adults were found to work quite a lot. And it's an area that we were most interested in, but we couldn't necessarily look at it through the themed grant round itself. However, we are looking at it through another mechanism. But what we did say is it could be possible for this grant round for a young person to be referred from a detached or outreach program where a youth worker has found to have built a relationship with a young person and said, do you know, this may be useful to you, could we refer you into this program? So we've looked at the research question, we've looked at the definition of a trusted adult, we've looked at who we wanted to target. The next question is, what did we want to fund? And there are a multitude of programs out there or interventions out there that we could have funded. But we were particularly interested in 3 types, if you will, of approaches or programs that we wanted to fund. Mentoring programs, key or caseworker models, or what we've called integrated approaches, which could be mentoring plus CBT, or key caseworker plus employment support. So it's plus something that they could offer that to those young people. We potentially also were interested in projects that were able to offer maybe mentoring and key worker caseworker models combined as well. So we were open to that also. But we just really need to clearly understand what the offer was and what that looks like in practice. And of course, all of this needed to be delivered within the context of the young people we were most interested in. So the last slide that I went through. Now, in terms of timeframes, we're aware that we already fund some mentoring programs, but our mentoring programs that we currently fund are normally anywhere between kind of 12 weeks up to maybe 36 weeks, something like that. So they're reasonably short term. So what we've said for this grant round is there were 2 kind of lengths, if you will, of projects that we were interested in. We called shorter term projects. So that was those that ran from five months plus up to 12 months. And then we had longer term projects, which was those running for more than 12 months, but no longer than 24 months. Now, we do know that there are some projects that run longer than 24 months. But I think, as you know, as a What Works Centre, we have a 10-year life cycle. We're already 4 years into our life cycle. And we had to be really clear in terms of getting that balance right, of looking at those longer term relationships that we believe are important as part of a trusted relationship for us to be able to research that well and give it every opportunity for us to find out whether it works and for who and in what circumstances. But equally, we needed to make sure that we could do that within the time frames of the fund as well. So we had to make sure that we balanced that well. What did it look like in practice? So, as you know, last year, I think it was around September time, the grant round opened. And then there was a period of about 7 or 8 weeks in which the application window was open for. We received 138 organisations, applications from organisations who requested 119 million in total from the YEF. And I think, as you can kind of see, that's a large number of organisations and a lot of money that's being requested from us. We then go through a series of processes when we're going through our assessment process. So of the 138, we assessed all of them. So all of our assessors scored each application once. 75% of our applications were scored again for quality assurance purposes, and that's what we endeavour to do. And then through that process, we put those scores into what we call a data-led approach, which is where we are able to use the assessment scores that have come through from our assessors to really determine which projects should go through to long listing. Now, we use a data-led approach because in reality, what we could do is just, for example, cream off the top however many we wanted to fund as part of our application rounds. But that would likely mean that we would be delivering all of our projects in the same areas to the same, we're using the same organisations. And actually, to ensure that we have a geographical spread, to ensure we have our commitment to race equity, and more broadly to ensure that we're reaching the right type of young people and programmes are being delivered in a way that is representative of as many areas as possible across England and Wales, we really have to think through Where are the programs working? What are they trying to do? Are they helping us achieve our aims and objectives? And what are the scores that our assessors have given us as well? So there's a whole host of things we have to take into account. What we then did is we longlisted 31 projects. What that then means is those 31 projects were then handed over to our evaluation team, who then reassessed all 31 projects through the lens of evaluation. Of those 31, we shortlisted and interviewed 16 projects. And of those 16 projects, and those interviews lasted 2 hours each, and you had an evaluation and program manager present from YEF. We basically picked up some of the key questions that were most important to us following the assessment that we really wanted to, or assessments that we really wanted to probe into. And of the 16, 8 are moving forward or have moved forward to what we call in the theory of change stage. So they're still not necessarily fully commissioned because we haven't signed grant agreements. We're not at that stage yet, but they have moved to the next stage. So you can see the numbers we're working with, and you can see how competitive it is. But what does the assessment look like in process, in practical terms, sorry, and what does the process look like? So we have 8 assessment criteria. We had 8 assessment criteria for this grant round, and they're broadly split into 2 buckets. The first bucket is it a great plan? And the second bucket is strong capability to be able to deliver that plan. So if we start off with what does a great plan look like? There are 4 criteria that link to a great plan. That is, does the project have a worthwhile outcome? So the outcomes that are chosen, are they the outcomes that interest the YEF the most? In most instances, they correlate quite nicely with what we've suggested we want to look at within the application guidance, because I think we're much clearer now about the outcomes that we really want to focus on. The next question is, or assessment criteria is, if delivered well, how likely is it that the project will achieve the outcome? So what we're trying to do there is several things. The first thing we're trying to understand is it really clear what the core components of the project is? As a layperson, or as a person who is not involved with your project, can I decipher what the core components are, how they're delivered, how they link together, and how they're likely to lead to change or change in the outcomes of interest for the young person? And am I able to suggest that there's any evidence to underpin that is likely to happen? So, for example, have you done prior evaluations? Are there any academic papers or other information that would suggest that these activities could lead to change within specific outcomes? The next assessment criteria is, are the projects truly aiming to reach the right type of young people that we are most interested in for this grant round? So it's really being able to look at how projects have described the young people that they want to work with and their unmet needs, and for us to understand how strongly they are aligned to our criteria of young people we wanted to work with this grant round. And then 4th is likely to lead to change. So a core part of our strategy is really being able to find out, if something works brilliantly, how likely is it could be expanded or scaled up or delivered across England and Wales in such a way that it could help us with that change piece? And I think that's really important for us, because if we find something that works really well, but it will only ever be in one small part of the country, and we don't have the potential to replicate it, for others to deliver it, for it to be scaled up, then it becomes a bit of a problem, because although we found it works, how do we then take that and share it with others if it doesn't have the potential to be able to be scaled up or replicated? So that's the first part. The second part is, okay, so if there's a great plan, what's the capability of the organisation and organisation partners to be able to deliver that plan well? So we know within any interventions or with any programs that we fund, especially within the context of evaluation, the clarity of what the plan is just as important as the ability for it to be delivered well. High quality delivery and quality assurance is essential, especially within the context of an impact evaluation, which is what we strive to do with all of our funding, which is to get projects that we fund and grantees that we fund to the point of being able to determine impact. The 4 assessment criteria that we look at within capability to deliver are What's the likelihood of projects to be able to reach the right type of young people? So you've said these are the young people you're going to work with, but what is your experience and your partner's experience of reaching young people, the young people that you said you're going to work with, or retaining them, understanding their unmet needs, and helping them through the process of the delivery of your project in ways that are plausible and realistic? And that includes understanding what the challenges are that your young people face, and really identifying some of the realistic mechanisms of being able to engage young people well. The next question is around able to deliver, or the next assessment criteria, sorry, is around able to deliver. This really starts to look at us probing applicants around identifying risk. So what are the key risks for your project? How do you intend to mitigate them? And also understanding things around your training and support needs and supervision needs of staff. Again, these are all really, really important to us because, again, we know every project has a level of risk. And even if there is high risk within that project, the effort open to that, providing the mitigations are suitable and appropriate for that risk. And we are well aware that the young people that we're wanting to support through our grant rounds, because many have really complex and unmet needs, and a number of them as well, it's challenging, it's hard. So there will be risks to delivery and engaging young people, potentially engaging their families as well, or some of the gatekeepers to them attending or being involved in projects and interventions. So it's super important that we can see that projects have really thought through what those risks are, and within the context of evaluation as well, where possible. The other thing for us is, again, working with the young people that we're really keen to work with, specifically with this grant round, but across our grant rounds. We know that there's a level of training, expertise, ongoing CPD and support that practitioners will need. Not just about their ability to deliver, but one of the things we're also keen on is understanding whether the project can be delivered in a racially equitable way. What does that look like in terms of your practitioner's training, your practitioner's delivery, and the context in which your program is being delivered? But we also know that there's potential for practitioners to need support as well, in relation to working with the young people to try and help them achieve positive outcomes. Actually, there are many things that the practitioners may need support with, you know, working with young people and seeing some of the day-to-day traumas or challenges that these young people face that we're here to serve, I think can often lead practitioners to need support themselves to really think through maybe some of the safeguarding things they need to think through, but also their own well-being as well, to ensure they are the top of their game as practitioners so they can continue to support young people. I think that's really important to us. The next assessment criteria is what we call evaluable, and then the fourth one is able to deliver at the required scale. So essentially, for us, one of the things that we're most interested in terms of evaluability is really, are you able to reach the number of young people that we would want to reach to be able to run a randomized controlled trial? Now, I put an RCT in here because that will always be our preferred measure, and that will always be our approach that we default to when it comes to trying to develop and design our evaluation approach. Mainly because although there are challenges with RCTs, actually it is, from an impact design and an experimental design perspective, the approach that allows us to really distinguish potential impact or effectiveness of the project on the outcomes we're most interested in, and limits any potential questions or bias, although there are limitations to any type of evaluation that is run. So we're really looking at, are they trying to reach the numbers that we are interested in? Now, there were some changes that we had made within the project or the application guidance as we were going through Grant Round 4, which is a trusted adult. One of the things that became clear is the numbers that we asked for within the applications were not quite enough for what we needed to be able to run a randomized control trial. What we didn't want to do is disadvantage any applications on that basis, because that was an error from our perspective or something that we learned in flight. So one of the things we looked at what are the numbers that projects said that they could reach, and what's the likelihood of their referral partnerships and their past delivery, that if we were to ask them, do you think you could scale up, what that might look like in practice. So we were able to use all of that information to be able to help us understand whether there was potential there to reach more numbers. And then finally scale, which I've broadly touched on, which is around, could you scale up to reach the number of children we would need if it's more than we had anticipated? Some other areas that we were really keen on, which they run through, they're cross-cutting through all of our assessment that we think through. So we are really keen to make sure that we support young people who come from marginalised backgrounds, especially those that are significantly overrepresented in things such as the youth justice system. We really want to tackle disproportionality. That means that our funding needs to reach young people who are disproportionately represented in some of the services that we're most interested in affecting change in. So many of our decisions are also driven by the need to be able to reach diverse groups of young people, but also to ensure that we're working with organisations that represent the type of young people that we're here to serve as well. The next thing that we take into account, which does feed into the assessment criteria, but I hope it gives you some context, is the type of evaluations we're here to do. So as a What Works Centre, we are committed to drive impact evaluations. So what does that mean in practice? First and foremost, we don't fund delivery of any project that we can't do some form of evaluation on. That's fundamentally, first and foremost, the thing that we have to do. Within that, there are certain types of evaluations that we need to push forward with to really help us build the evidence base and plug some of the gaps within our sector or across the sectors that we work. To do that, that means that we need to push and strive for as many impact evaluations as we can. As a What Works Centre, we default to experimental designs when it comes to impact evaluations. In real terms, that means randomised control trials and quasi-experimental designs. We will use the latter, so quasi-experimental designs, in cases where we're not able to do randomised control trials. Our preference will always be to do randomised control trials. So one of the things that we're looking out for when we're doing the assessments of the applications is to really understand whether a project or an intervention is ready for the type of evaluation we need them to be ready for. And that's really understanding the potential delivery of the project within the context of a randomised control trial. So I think that's really important to understand. For many of those in Grant Round 4, we believe that there could be a pilot stage, so piloting some form of impact design, and then potentially going through into a full kind of efficacy trial or impact trial. When we were looking at the projects or applications for this grant round, obviously one of the things that we were looking at is obviously whether there was a great plan, so the promise of the project, but also the potential for us to push hard and fast to be able to do these impact studies as well. So that is one of the things that is always first and foremost on our mind. And I think it's really important just to go back to our mission. You know, we're here to try and reduce violence in young people, and I think for us to be able to do that, our role as a What Works Centre is really to be able to find the most promising projects that we can test at impact level, so we can answer some of those key questions. We can understand what works for who in what circumstances, and that is core to everything that we do. So that was just giving a brief whistle-stop tour as to what the round was. The next couple of slides, I'm going to go into what made a strong application in this grant round and areas where applicants did less well. And then I'll open the floor to questions. So what made a strong application? So many of the applications that have got through to the top 8 that we're working with in Theory of Change now, their strength was in the fact that they were evaluable and scalable. So that meant that they had prior evidence in some way, underpinning evidence, either through conducting evaluations previously of their project, or parts of their project going through evaluation, having underpinning evidence from academic research or like evaluations of similar projects that they could draw on to show that there was prior evidence to suggest that this would work. They also tended to have some knowledge of evaluation as well, and that was often intertwined with the fact that parts of their project had been evaluated, or they have been involved in evaluations of organisations themselves, and that they had the potential to reach a larger number of young people either themselves or through their partnerships. And that was evident through the background evidence they were able to give, the information they've given about how their project has run before, the referral partnerships that they've worked with before, their partnerships and their potential to expand should they need to. The next thing was really around kind of outcomes, I would say, and also likelihood to kind of lead to change. And what I mean by that is criteria, assessment criteria 1 and 2 were quite strong in these applications. So there was clear alignment with our outcomes of interest. So that generally means things around, for example, offending, externalizing behaviours, that they tended to be the main focus of the projects. And they were things that really aligned to what was most interest to us. Evidence presented did show potential for the core activities to lead to change. So by the core activities, what I mean is, firstly, there was a clear understanding, and our assessors could clearly see from the application what were the core components or activities that were delivered, when, by who, what the dosage was, and that was clear that by delivering those activities and the dosage, that there was potential for change, either through the evaluations that they had done themselves, through prior similar evaluations of other projects, potentially those that have been done in the States or elsewhere, and or potentially by having underpinning academic evidence also. And that links into the bit at the bottom, reasonable link between delivering and achieving intended outcomes. So what I mean by that is, if I deliver this activity here, the likelihood of it to lead to changing or nudging the outcome here is pretty high or pretty good. So it seems reasonable that by delivering this, you will achieve those outcomes. And that's really important, because in some cases, there are some programs that are quite broad in terms of the numbers of different outcomes that they could achieve. And sometimes those links to the outcomes we're most interested in are not as strong as other projects. And we have to be really clear that we're working with those strongest projects. Where did applications tend to do less well? And again, it's that bit that I've just kind of mentioned about the clarity of what was being delivered. So that meant there was difficulty in understanding the core services. So what are the services? In some instances, it's like there's a lot going on here and I can't decipher what's being run concurrently, what's being run first, second, third, what's the dosage? So what's the intensity, the number of sessions broadly? How often do they see their practitioner? For how long? Are young people getting very different experiences? Now, there can be some tweaking around the edges depending on the young person, but there has to be a core set of ingredients that's similar enough so we understand that young person A is broadly getting similar to young person B, and therefore we can test what they're being or what's being delivered to them and what that looks like in practice. Service is very tailored. That kind of fits into that. If it's super bespoke, if you have 3 young people and 1 young person get 8 months delivery of a mentoring intervention, their intensity is reasonably light. You then get another young person who gets 16 months but high intensity, and another person who gets 12 months and it's medium intensity of delivery, but that's all part of the same project. How do we test that? Because that's very different in terms of length, dosage, time, and what's being delivered. So what are we actually testing and what are we actually looking at? So having some uniformity there so the experiences aren't totally different is super important. And then there were some projects who, I think the projects were really, really good, but I think they were more early help or prevention. So again, if you think about the lens of who are we here to support for this grant round, and looking at those young people with the unmet needs that we were most interested in for this grant round, some projects, the links were slightly tenuous, or they weren't as strongly aligned to those kind of key criteria as those projects that we ended up taking through. And then in some cases, there were some great projects, but it just felt like there needed to be further development. We weren't really sure exactly what the project was, and it felt like there needed to be some refinement of what those core components were. And that's absolutely fine, but that's not the type of funding that we tend to offer. Again, moving on to the next stage, so aiming to and likely to reach the right type of young people. Again, I touched on this before in the last slide. We really wanted to make sure that projects that we took through were really well aligned to the young people we want to support with this grant round. That was really key. So in some cases where it was unclear who the referral mechanisms or what the referral mechanisms are, who the partners are, weren't really sure about the eligibility criteria. So who are the young people? What really are their unmet needs? Because there's lots going on here. And it could be that part of what you're saying fits the criteria we're interested in, but it seems really broad. We couldn't really decipher whether the young people were the right type of young people for this grant round. And that was really important because of the strength in our desire to really support those young people within this grant round. And that's particularly important because we do, as I said before, we do have some mentoring projects, but what sets it apart for this grant round is the length of time we're interested in those mentoring projects and the type of young people we really want to work with. Then there are some other areas for consideration, specifically around race equity. So strength of understanding in terms of the projects really being able to say what delivery looks like when we're thinking about cultural sensitivity. So how are projects delivered in a culturally sensitive way? What does that actually mean? What does that look like in practice? Understanding what racially equitable delivery looks like across all partners, and understanding where there may be areas where there are challenges to be racially equitable, identifying those areas and identifying mitigations that you will put in place to be able to rectify that. Understanding the potential for young people from racialized groups to have kind of different experiences. So again, you know, understanding the different young people that you work with, what's the likelihood their experiences might be different? And if that then ends up manifesting itself by specific category or group, how do you mitigate against that so that that isn't a factor that biases the experience of young people involved? The other thing which is really important to us was really understanding referrals, retention and dropout. Now, this is important in the context of racial equity, but it's important just generally anyway. Really understanding your numbers that come through referral partners. What does that look like in terms of recruitment? What does that look like in terms of retention? And what are the numbers that drop out? I am always very suspicious of projects that say they have 100% retention, because the young people we work with often, they will have so many things going on in their lives that it's almost impossible to have 100% retention. But if you do, that's great. Show us the evidence. Show us how you managed to do that. And then the final bit is around training needs. What does that look like in practice in terms of ensuring staff are able to deliver in a racially equitable way, understand local context and community context as well? So that is it from the perspective of the presentation. But if I stop sharing my screen and then open up so I can see everybody on here, and I am open to questions for those who may have questions. Mary?
Hi there, hi. So my question really is about that point about the volume. We're relatively small, and we've applied to you twice now, and both times I've felt we sort of hit absolutely on the mark as to who we're targeting how, but I did think there must be a scale question. in future rounds, are you going to be quite overt about the scale that you need? Just to be sort of be quite efficient about that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that was the feedback we took on board. And actually for grant round 5 of positive activities, we've, based on the grant rounds that we have open, we have given more specific ranges, and they are much higher than the ranges we've given before. So you'll see, okay. And that will be based on that. What we suggest is because we're still really interested working with smaller organisations, but I think what we haven't necessarily done is said, look, this is the figures, this is the scale. Is there a way that you could partner with other organisations so your throughput of young people could hit the scale that we need? Is there a way that you could work with partners so you could deliver to that scale in a sustainable way as an organisation? What does that look like in practice? So we'd never want to discourage people applying, but it has to be, as you've said, Mary, in the right way. And we have to be clear in our messaging about what the numbers look like and what that scale looks like.
So for something like the violence interrupter call for information that's open now, would you say that is likely to then turn into a funding round that has those same scale criteria? Or when it's an early evidence discussion, you're interested in I'm trying to work out whether it's worth our while carrying on, and like for that one, for like the violence interrupter bit, is it worth us having a go or not?
I would say for that one, yes. So the reason we pulled that one out is because that could have quite easily fitted in this round, but we just don't, we're trying to figure out how to evaluate it. We're just not sure how to evaluate it yet. So I think it's different stakes to themed grant rounds. So this is what we call a themed grant round. Although the violence interrupter stuff does link to that, that's more of an exploratory piece, because at the minute we just don't know. And I would suggest you continue with it, because if we're interested in something, the other things that we can do when we do a piece of work like we are with violence interrupter is, if we find that there are several smaller organisations we're talking to and you're all doing similar things, actually, it may be further down the line, we say, look, guys, we've spoken to you all. We're really keen in what you're doing. Can you all work with us? And can we come together to do something as a collective? So I would say still go for that one. The themed grant rounds now moving forward, so positive activities, if you go on and you have a look at that, we have been really explicit about the numbers and scale now. So yeah, you'll see us taking slightly different approaches, but violence interrupter I would still encourage you to apply for.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or thoughts? Holly.
Hello, thank you so much. It was really informative. I just had a quick question about expression of interest, and I just wondered, given the high number of applicants that you received versus the number that you could actually fund, I just wondered, especially for organisations where, you know, we spent a huge amount of time, rightly so, engaging partners, local authorities, police forces, and then obviously weren't successful at progressing because it was so fiercely competitive. Is there any sort of thought around, you know, could you have a much smaller application process just so that you can narrow down what does float your boat and what is going to meet the criteria before we then have to do that huge detailed process, which obviously you guys probably don't have, you know, you've then got to spend the time reading it as well as we've got to spend compiling it.
Yeah, and that's, you know, great feedback, Holly, and it's something that we're constantly trying to balance. So these are things that we constantly look at in flight. Should we change it? What does it look like? Could we make the process easier? Could we streamline it? I think we've tried to streamline some of the questions for the next theme grant round to be more efficient. Have we done an EOI for it? No, we haven't. Could we do an EOI for it? We will come back and we'll revisit it. I think there's pros and cons for us to do that, but I absolutely hear the amount of time, resource and effort it takes to put in an application to us and the partners that you're working with. So we can take it away and look at it again, specifically probably for the next theme grant round, which will be grant round 6 that will come out that we're working on at the minute. So I won't take it off the table and I'll take it back to the team and we can relook at that based on your feedback. But I do hear you about the intensity in which you have to work to get the information to us, and is there a more streamlined way that we can help you reach out to us?
Thank you. That was really useful. I guess it's that balance, isn't it, between you knowing enough about what we plan to do. But I guess for us, we had spoken to the local authorities and police forces. We'd developed kind of a rough criteria process because we felt that's what you needed for that approach, which obviously is quite time consuming. And I just had one further sort of point but reflection about the need for the randomized controlled trials. That was really controversial in the areas that we wanted to try and work in. Obviously we did send in subsequent questions and we had brilliant responses, so thank you to the team for getting back to us on that. But I think when you're looking at working with police forces and local authorities that perhaps aren't pro RCTs or they don't see the value of them, that then became quite difficult for us to try to sort of convince people about that when actually we haven't done a huge amount ourselves as a charity. So yeah, it's just a reflection point really, and obviously I understand you have your own criteria and your own preferences, but I do think that became quite challenging for us, and we did lose one local authority because they just weren't in support at all for any form of sort of RCT.
Yeah, again, absolutely hear you on that. And I think part of our remit is making sure that we work in flight to try and get the message out there as to why we do what we do. And you know, there are many kind of evaluation approaches, and each has their own merit. Specifically for us, as you know, ours is experimental designs and RCT is always our preference. But yeah, there is a piece that we need to do, ensuring that the sectors we work with across our funding rounds are kind of moving with us in mindset around the RCTs and the approaches we kind of wish to take. I think most of the issues tend to be around the ethical points around RCTs, and that's often quite easily kind of resolved in the respect that we actually don't know, you know, whether these projects work or not in terms of the level of evaluation that we need to do, and therefore we're not withholding a service from any young person because actually part of this process is to figure out whether it actually is effective for that young person or not. I think the other thing to be clear is as well is we don't, I think that sometimes randomized controlled trials, people think, oh, a group of young people get something, a group of young people don't. That will never be the case. We always figure out what we call business as usual. So what would the young people get in lieu of your project, and what does that look like in practice? So yeah, but I definitely hear you with that, and there is more work that we need to do about that, so we take the sectors with us on that journey. Any other questions or thoughts? If you happen to have anything that you want to follow up on, please do reach out to us. I'd be happy to answer those questions, but I do really want to just reiterate that we are we're always super excited and super grateful for the amount of effort that organisations take to put in applications to the Youth Endowment Fund and for our themed grant rounds. And in fact, all of our grant rounds, we do very much appreciate the resource required to do it and do it well. And there are so many fantastic projects that are being delivered. It is really, really tight and tough margins for us to make these decisions on. But we really appreciate your time in joining us in some of these sessions where we can give feedback, sessions where we talk about the grant rounds that are up and coming, and also your time for submitting those applications as well. If there aren't any more questions, I will give everybody back 5 minutes of their time. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for joining today. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully see you in the not too distant future when we open some of our other grant rounds. Thanks so much.